We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Welcome back to Round Table. We're here with the Congresswoman-to-be, Danielle Jessica Pellet. How you doing, Danny?
Great. I'm great to be here.
We've been preparing for this show pretty much all morning, and we got a lot to get into. I saw you recently at the Transgender Pride of Dallas. We bumped into each other. I'm sure you were campaigning. We're going to get into that. General Mattis had a survey or released some information on a survey for the LGBT in the military, basically a test and a developmental, I guess you could say, to figuring out if the LGBT should be able to stay in the military. And if they pass this survey, this specific survey, I think, will allow them to continue serving. We'll get into that as time goes on. Because I know I was telling you my information is pretty brief on that one, but it's definitely a deep subject. And then as of recently, the national anthem protests are really gaining steam and catching fire. We've now had our president openly just come down on the NFL. He's calling out the owners now, saying that you're basically screwing your league because you're letting the players dictate. So yeah, we'll definitely get into that topic as well. But before we do, what's the latest on your campaign?
Let's see. It's third quarter just finished, and we now have, I think, 11 people announced in this race. So it's going to be a really tight race.
11 people. Are we? Is this kind of a reflection of the last race, the last political election, where there's one side that has a lot of people that are competing?
No. So in 32 district against Pete Sessions, nobody ran as a Democrat. So it was a Green Party Libertarian, and no one ran. And then, lo and behold, Hillary Clinton got more votes than Donald Trump in the 32nd district, Pete Sessions district. So now everyone and their dog wants to get in this race, and that's great. But they think that if they run on, I'm not Trump or I'm not Pete Sessions, it's enough to win. And that's just, it's BS. It's not enough to say I'm not this person to win. I am struggling really hard to make certain that this message gets through, because a lot of Hillary Clinton's strategy, I wouldn't say her strategy, but a lot of what she was known for in the 2016 race against Trump was, look how bad he is, I'm not him. That's not a winning message.
That's an obsolete campaign promotion, I think, too. Like, look, I'm not the other guy. Like, that's almost like watching sports. I don't want my team to win. I just want the other team to lose. Well, that's not doing anything for anybody. Like, that's who are you really representing when you say stuff like that? And I know you've been very objective about it.
And I think that's why there's been like 11 people running, because this looked like it's going to be a flippable district, so everyone wants to run because, there's going to be money getting poured in from national. And I'm like, if you think national money wins an election, I got some bad news for you, because I would have preferred having, Jeb Bush as president over Donald Trump. So money doesn't win elections. It's being part of the community, being known, showing up. And I don't think that people coming in from outside, bringing money from outside, is going to win this.
I agree. Now, you're a huge. We'll touch on this before we get started. You're a huge supporter, and we were talking about it before we, came on, of single-payer health care. And I know that, and we're going to definitely get into it as time goes on. The Medicare for All bill by Bernie Sanders. I wanted to definitely get see where your head was at on that one.
There was actually a competing one that wasn't done by Bernie Sanders. That wasn't necessarily single payer for all. It was only slightly more moderate, and I thought it had a better chance of winning. I can't recall the guy's name now, but I'm definitely trying to push for anything that gets us off of a for-profit system, because if we have a middleman bean counter between you and your doctor, then you are not getting the best health care you can.
Would you say that running against your opponents, that's one of the strongest angles you have for your campaign? That, look, let's stop bullshitting. Let's just single payer health care. Everybody gets coverage. Stop with this. Oh, we're turning into socialists. And we're turning into Nazi Germany. We're trying to help people. Is that, I'm trying to understand if that's your message.
My main message is going to be pointing out, like, my friend whose daughter has cystic fibrosis was going to have to pay up $250,000 on day one of this baby of hers being born. And how the hell are we supposed to say that's right and justified? And we can say, hey, look at Pete Sessions. Look at how much money he's been getting from the health insurance industries. Let's look at these other people who are candidates running against him. See how much money they're trying to get. And if you are essentially trying to get money from an industry that puts that middleman bean counter between you and someone's doctor, that is just messed up. And we do need to talk about healthcare from a perspective of, like, the fire departments. We all pay in to make certain that everyone is safe. And we need to do it with healthcare because we've had the bird flu. We've had, issues where something's very contagious, and we don't need to put a dollar price on it and then say, oh, well, because we put a price tag on it, then these people can get it because we don't care. That's not how America works, and unfortunately, sicknesses can spread. So we have to think of this as a public issue.
Absolutely.
And raising costs.
Oh, of course. Well, and that's a whole other thing. We will, as we talk about, more of what's going on in the economy, you'll see the insurance companies kind of tie in real quickly there as the middlemen when it comes to healthcare and whatnot. But let's go ahead and go in on national anthem protests. We have the president. He talked about the NFL is basically being strong-armed by the athletes. Now, if I want to be objective about this, I could say that we're dealing with a company that has disgruntled workers, I guess you could say. And yeah, it's not necessarily the first, it's not necessarily kosher, or maybe that's the wrong term. It's not necessarily normal to have workers that are so disgruntled and so fed up with the system that they'll try to make a stand, or they'll try to do something so, I guess, inappropriate and out of whack that now they're going to Now the question is, do we employ them, or is the business becoming, is the business weaker? I guess where I'm going with all of this is saying that the NFL is a privately owned company, and they do operate on their own guidelines in terms of, how the mechanics of how to get ready for a sport and whatnot. But when it comes to showing exercising your First Amendment right, at some point, like, there's got to be a separation between what's good for business and what's good for society.
Yeah, and the NFL, being a business, has every right to do whatever the hell they want, and it's a shame. But I also wanted to say that a person of color in sports isn't necessarily able to say, I'm not going to do a political act, because we had, I forgot his name now, right before World War II with the Olympics. He beat the Germans, and the Germans talked about how they were the super race. And it's like, this is proving it's not, and unfortunately, whenever a person of color or anyone of a minority status speaks up, it's always going to be seen as, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that. I've had conservatives say, well, why aren't you more like, Martin Luther King Jr.? He never blocked a highway. And it's like, yes, he did.
Did way more than that.
Yeah, and it's just that moment of, historically, we've apparently forgotten that protests is how we work, and it's how we get the message out there. And, we've literally had white supremacists chanting and shouting and having torches up and everything, and it's horrid, but guess what? They're allowed to do that. So when I hear people say, you're not allowed to protest like this, when you're talking about a person of color who's protesting peacefully and silently, that's BS. I mean, even in, which Olympics was it, where they had the gloves and the white power, and there was the Australian guy next to him in bronze in third place, and he was like standing in solidarity. Do you remember that one? It was a black power fist.
I wasn't alive technically then, but
okay.
I'm trying to think. There's this block where the number one guy stands on top, and the two. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Of course, people are. Of course, people don't like being one-upped, and and finding out that like there is no one superior race and whatnot. But and how it relates to the NFL and national anthem protesting at least from how I look at it, is you have players that are trying to speak out on an issue that need. I mean, this is activism. This is social activism. That's all it is. And for people to have a problem with the way you're doing it, that shouldn't stop anything from happening. The First Amendment protects them. The end.
And the argument saying, well, that's an insult to the flag. No, it's not. And they say it's an insult to our troops. And no, it really isn't, because our troops can also say, you have every right to do that. So we really need to essentially let people protest peacefully the way they want to. And if the NFL says, well, we're a business and we don't want you doing this, well, they have that right. But when Donald Trump, our president, starts trying to push and say, hey, you should fire them, that's where it starts to get hinky, because guess what? You are the president, and you can't use your pulpit as a leader to say you can't protest.
And while we're on that topic too, I think it's necessary. As a veteran, I personally feel like I personally feel and believe that I fought for the right for people to protest, for people to organize, for people to speak out. And the First Amendment is not to protect popular speech, it's to protect unpopular speech. So when we start trying to pull, and I agree with the multiple veterans that are coming out and speaking on behalf of Colin Kaepernick and those that in the NFL that choose to protest the national anthem. My thing is, people need to understand that these are separate issues. You can have respect for the flag, you can have respect for for us, for the troops, but that's not, because people choose to protest, the national anthem or choose to protest the flag, that's not saying that you're insulting anybody. But I mean, people who choose to take it as an insult, here's my question to you, and if you're out there watching or listening right now, and shout out to the round table while we're on this topic. What is it that makes you so offended by a person using their First Amendment right? You not liking something is something that goes back to childhood. Just because you don't like someone doing something doesn't mean you have the power to stop it.
Yeah, I think it's an insecurity, because people consider rights as a zero-sum game, and I've heard people say, well, if they get this, then they're taking it away from us. And it's like, no, just because someone says Black Lives Matter does not mean everyone else doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that I don't care about the police. It means, hey, this is a minority that needs to be recognized, and there's an issue that we need to address. And it does not necessarily mean that you are losing anything. Unfortunately, a lot of people start to realize that, and then they realize that it's a privilege, and guess what? It really is unfair, because we shouldn't have an issue where, we had, armed protesters taking over a government building, and the police were like, oh, we're just gonna...
And you notice how quickly that fell out of the news circuit too.
Oh, yeah.
All these white men with guns that are showing that they're trying to be a threat, and all the while there's no outcry. The National Guard wasn't called. There wasn't, businesses weren't trying to get them fired. I think there's an inconsistency going on here when in how we choose to view it.
Yeah, they say don't protest violently, but white people can. And we have a person of color quietly, silently taking a knee during the national anthem, and apparently that is offensive to everyone. No, it's not. People who get offended, you need to take a step back and think about it and go, hey, there's a big bias here, and we need to allow people to protest silently, peacefully, and within our First Amendment rights.
I agree. Now, as moving forward, So for General Mattis, he developed a survey. What I hate about this topic is that we even have to talk about this. A survey was developed to ultimately identify the LGBT that are in the military, to see if they're, evaluate them to see if they're well enough to keep serving.
You mean worthy?
Okay, I like the Congresswoman's word, more worthy to serve. So we're really at a point in 2017 where we have to talk about the LGBT like they're an alien culture, they're an alien species that have now invaded our military, our DOD. So I wanted to get your thoughts on just the whole thing.
One of the greatest movies I watched growing up was the Tuskegee Airmen, and they talked about racial inclusion in the military. And one of the, even Glory was another good one. I think Denzel Washington. It, the U.S. military was segregated racially for a long time, and it wasn't, I think, until after World War II when it was one of the presidents just said, "I'm done. You are integrating. Fuck this shit." And they did. And the military has almost never had a problem with it collectively. Recently, we had an issue at the Air Force Academy where some of the cadets' doors were there was racially biased things against people of color there, and the lieutenant general in charge of the Air Force Academy said, if you're racist, if you can't handle differences, then get out, because diversity is our strength. And it comes to show that the U.S. military has progressed in many ways, and even when they're just told point blank, you are going to include people, because if they can meet the requirements, if they can do the job, then they're going to help you out, and we're all going to be stronger together. So.
And then I can only.
Did they actually do a survey for integrating the troops racially before?
I'm really not sure.
I bet they did.
I think with the Tuskegee, I think it's the Tuskegee experiment, where it wasn't a survey. They were just, or maybe it was. I'm not sure. I have to look that part up, where they just wanted to see if they could have if having blacks in the military, having blacks that are officers and in charge at higher levels and everything. There was just this stigma after the Civil War that we couldn't do anything. And so as we kept fighting wars, we kind of figured out that, we do have a lot of similarities, with each other. So maybe a black person could be an officer. You know what I mean? Maybe a black person could, run a squadron, run a platoon or whatnot.
I highly recommend that movie, The Tuskegee Airmen, with Lawrence Fishburne. He was amazing in it. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, there's a scarlet letter on the chest of every LGBT that's in the military currently, of all four branches. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't even know how to feel about her. I don't know how to react to that. Like, could you imagine? Well, obviously, but I mean, I guess where I'm going with it is to imagine a world that you're now marked. It's like I hate to admit it, but it's almost like X-Men. You know what I mean? Yeah. We're now talking in terms of the LGBT are mutants. Those who support them, they're mutant sympathizers. Like, really, we're at that point now, round table, where that's how we're choosing to identify with human beings.
So that was essentially the issue I had back in 2004 when I was 2 months away from field training. I was looking at the paperwork, and I knew if I wanted to be a pilot, it was a mandatory 10-year minimum commitment. And I had 3 things drilled into my head: integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. But integrity first was the first of those core values, and don't ask, don't tell was still around then. So I was asking myself if I could deny my gender identity, or at least hide it, and essentially sell out my integrity to serve my country. And I made a decision that I couldn't do it, and I kept my integrity intact. And as I saw what was going on as we were going into Iraq and finding our gay Arabic translators, it made me realize, hey, if I want to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, we've got a really bad domestic policy here to fire the people who speak the language of the country we're invading. We should not be kicking people out, and that's been my opinion ever since then. So, yes, should gay people serve in our military? Obviously. It's just sad that we're coming to this point where it's like, are you feeling safe about it? Is this an issue of unit cohesion? We answered this before. We answered this when they were talking about racially integrating the troops. So this is just another level of get over it. We're people, we want to serve, and the more that you try to kick people out, the less safe our country is going to be, because you're going to have fewer people who want to join. So,
and I also just to add, to that, is there? I don't know if people really believe that there's a is there a way to identify with the enemy? Because how do you understand who the enemy is if the requirements or if the guidelines are constantly changing in terms of who we're supposed to identify? First, like you said, it was us, the black people, that no, they shouldn't be in the military, they shouldn't be able to serve, they shouldn't be able to they shouldn't be able to lead and command over squadrons and platoons and whatnot. And then, of course, as time, and like that's been lingering really since the Civil War. But as time, moves on, then okay, now the women in the military, women serving, now women, becoming officers, being in charge, and then as that still lingers on, because the issues of sexual assault, of course, linger on and following along with that and whatnot. But now, of course, LGBT has taken the helm in terms of, well, like they're the new flavor, I guess, to reject. So, in what way do we make their lives more miserable, just in terms of, hey,
exploitative capital.
Exactly. It's like, hey, we're going to war, but on top of that, you're gay and I'm not. So let's find a reason to make a problem about that.
Seems like. One of the things I remember from the U.S. military in 06, 07 was that we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the military started realizing that they were having a shortage of numbers. And one of the things they were doing was they were having to revise and lower the standards when it comes to certain tattoos and piercings. Because if you're in the military, you can't have certain tattoos. And they were trying to have to figure out if you could get a waiver, and they would have to inspect your tattoo and make certain that it wasn't like, a giant 8-8 Heil Hitler on your neck or something like that. So there's been an issue of retention, and there's been an issue of who do we allow in, and the fact that we're having to fight for gay people while they're saying we need to inspect your tattoo and make certain you're not a white supremacist is kind of telling.
Well, and then I was exactly just gonna touch on that why is it, if the government is so much about, okay, eliminating the threats, we see the threats here in America. White supremacy is the biggest threat right now. So and it affects multiple facets in America. Like, we're talking about police, we're talking about politics, we're talking about sports. I mean, there at some point, like, we got to find a way to undercut white supremacy so it doesn't become justified, in terms of treating someone, however you want to treat them. And I mean, like, just in tying that in with the issue we're talking about with the LGBT in the military, this never really should have been a debate. After Don't Ask, Don't Tell should have showed you that there are clearly patriotic members of the LGBT community that want to serve, that are willing to hide their identity to show that they can put the country above themselves, and they've constantly done that and still face the discrimination over if they're worthy enough to. I don't understand how that happens.
It turns into people finding groups that they identify with, and it's an us versus them. And when they have this identity of, this is what America looks like, this is how we should make America great again, it makes them have this identity of what it used to be and how it should be better when it goes back to that, even if it's a falsehood, which is essentially what Make America Great Again is. It's like 1950s white housewife suburban life that never really existed. It's BS. And unfortunately, when there's the us versus them, there's the, well, we're white, oh, well, we're Christians, oh, well, we're this and we're that. It's like, well, I don't know those people, and therefore I think we are a country built for us and not them. That's why we have conservatives talking about our Judeo-Christian ethics and values, and they're like, no, we're not Muslim, we don't want Muslims in Congress. And it's just like, you do know Muslims are also an Abrahamic faith. You do know there's people who are atheists, people who are, Hindu. There's all sorts of faiths in America that we need to accept and embrace, and just not allow us to be divided on these camps, because when they think, oh no, if this happens, then they're going to bring their Sharia law into our Christian nation, whereas we've got the person who's like, I want to buy a beer at like 10 a.m. on a Sunday, but I can't because we have these Christian blue laws that are still like in our policy, which make no sense.
And then let's also remember too, the Republican Party is supposedly about saving money and reducing spending, government spending and whatnot. It's going to cost money to print the paper, to print the actual sheets, to actually hire the staff that's going to have to survey the LGBT who have to leave their job to go to medical and be identified or just be outed like this. And it's like, okay, so you're okay with spending more money to do this, but you're supposed to be about saving money, I thought.
Yeah, as a former conservative, I saw through that BS a long time ago. It is their selling point. They say that they're for small government, and then they do the opposite. They say they're for responsible funding, and then they essentially time after time again say, we're going to drug test for welfare, even though drug tests kits and the processing cost more than welfare. It's if they can accept the facts and admit that they're wrong, then it'd be great, but they're not going to, because they have a narrative that they are pushing. They are pushing a narrative of, this is who we are, this is what we want to do, this is how we want to keep things, and these others who aren't us are coming in and trying to change things. Those others are trying to say, government's taking over your health care. These others are coming in with their Sharia law, when, they're not, but they have a narrative within their camp that is trying to keep them insulated from facts. And there's been studies about, you can give someone facts and they will actually be more attuned against it. They will put up a shield against it and double down on ideas like tax cuts fill potholes. And unfortunately, in order to bridge this divide, we have to find the commonality and then slowly help them understand that you've been lied to all your life by the Republican Party if you believe these issues.
They haven't been lied to. They've just been told alternative facts. I think there's a difference. I don't know. Round table, do y'all agree? That's our school, our public education system. That's our job mark. Alternative facts, all of that. That's how we make the world go around. People would rather focus on what they think to be the problem, the perceived problem, like you said, rather than identify with the fact that we are all one human race. Now there are different races, there are different subcultures within the human race, but that doesn't change the fact that whether we're talking about racism in the military or homophobia in the military, that people are always trying to find a way, and they're justifying it by a fear that's really misled or misinformed, or you know what I mean.
And it doesn't help that we have a media that wants to sell the controversy, because whenever they talk about things like climate change, all right, here's a person who believes in climate change, and here's the opposing side, and it's like maybe you're giving too much of a voice to the side that doesn't actually have as many numbers. And remember, we should stick to facts and say, yeah, by the way, we have proven that pollution is bad for our environment, so let's just quit trying to sell the controversy. It's what they do with creationism versus intelligent design. It's what they're talking about, these people are bringing Sharia law versus a Muslim that's trying to say, no, we're not bringing in Sharia law. It's making it sound like both sides are equal, and they're not, because we have a First Amendment, which isn't just free speech, but it's also about the establishment of a religion for the nation. And we are supposed to be you can say what you want, believe what God you want, or not believe in a God you want, and we will not push
according
laws.
To the paperwork, yes.
And we're not going to push laws forcing you to do a certain faith or to make everyone under one religion. So
talk about I saw you at the Transgender Pride of Dallas. I was able to go live on the audio for it. There was actually a diverse crowd. There actually was an LGBT veteran out there that was speaking up in terms of how the struggle of don't ask, don't tell really does affect the LGBT community that wants to serve, and then of course there was a wall of all of the most recent LGBT members, that have been killed, in hate crimes or in some form of another discrimination. I definitely just wanted to get your spill on what brought you there.
Yeah, well, my friend Jayla Winters was helping put this on, along with a few others. I want to say Valor McKinney and someone else's name I can't recall right now. But we've had a Pride Parade for as long as I can recall, and we've had recently something called Queer Bomb, which is on the anniversary of the Stonewall riots. So this time we wanted to see if we could have something exclusively, specifically for trans issues, because the LGBT community is a big family, but there is a big difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. And while in the past sexual orientation was the easy one to target and try to go against, gender identity, people who are cross-dressers, people who are transgender, people who wanted to transition from one gender to the other and live publicly like that, were just considered persona non grata in society for so long. And now we're actually having marriage equality, so we're moving the Overton window towards more equality of the LGBT community. But because of that, there's going to be a backlash, and they're looking for a new victim, and obviously it's going to be the trans community. So we kind of need to have our own space and our own voice and say, please join us in this, because now you have marriage equality. Now we're pushing for Employment Non-Discrimination Acts. We're still having issues where it's like, you can't pee in this bathroom because we know that you queers predate on children. that has been a long-term dog whistle used against the LGBT community. And now that we now
Most recently in the bathroom bill too, that failed.
yeah, well, I mean, originally it was against gays and lesbians. It was against having them in schools, having them as scout leaders, and more as we're getting towards marriage equality, people understand and meet people who are gay, lesbian, and bisexual, but then there's still the trans issue. And they're trying to conflate trans people with sexual predators. And they say, well, it's not you, it's the actual sexual predators that we have to worry about. And well, guess what? You know what? Predators don't do this, and making this law won't stop an actual predator.
And here's what what I'm trying to figure out with that too. What is the criteria that's supposed to identify an LGBT and a sexual predator as, or the differences between them? Like, if they're supposed to, there's clearly a criteria they're trying to go by to avoid, to avoid certain situations from happening. But I guess I don't know if I'm asking the question right. What is it there? How are you making the basis that, oh, you're LGBT or you're trans, so you must be a sexual predator? I don't get that. You know what I mean?
They don't really
the
have one. It's just that's the way that they it's the way that they target. And I think the last article I saw recently had a woman of color who was not trans, cisgender, was getting harassed and cornered and had a gun pulled on her, saying, show us your vagina, let's make certain that you're not a trans person, because I think he was like rubbing her feet or something, and it was just like, oh, I don't want to accidentally have been rubbing some dude's feet. And it's just like, you aren't the law, there's no law against this, and can you just let her live and let live? And this is a cisgender person who's getting targeted for trans violence at this point. That's how bad it is, because there is no way to.
I'm pulling it up on my phone here. There was a story recently, you brought it to my attention when you were talking about discrimination, of a teenager, LGBT teenager that was murdered in Missouri, 14 years old. I'm actually, if you give me a couple of seconds, I can pull it up. It's very sad. I wanted to get your take on it once I could show you the story.
That was the one where she was murdered by her friends, stabbed multiple times, eyes were gouged out, and she was multiple stab wounds into her sexual organs and set on fire. And yeah, it was considered an issue where it wasn't considered a hate crime by the local police. And
interesting, the local police. Now, this is the same local police that, was covering Michael Brown, the same local police that was dealing with the riots. I don't know if there's a connection there. Now we got another hate crime that they won't call or classify as one.
Yeah, it's and I sometimes
her name was her name was Allie Steinfeld. She was 17.
Yeah, it's really sad, because we've got this issue where people who don't look like everyone else are getting targeted, and then the crime that happens against them is excessively brutal. And when it comes to a hate crime, there are certain elements that have to be proven, that it was specifically biased against the person for being of a minority status, and usually, not always, the crime itself is going to be more heinous and designed to be dehumanizing. So as an ex-conservative, I originally thought, well, you know what, a crime is a crime, motive is motive, it's not a hate crime. But then I saw about the dragging in Jasper, Texas, and then I started researching, oh, wait a minute, this was a person that you didn't even know. It was Matthew Shepard. It's like, you just met them, you had this reaction, and if they had not been this minority status, they would have survived. But because they got excessively killed. And in this case, they did know her, and that might be more of a sticking point stipulation of, was it a hate crime or not? Because usually it's a complete stranger that you meet, and there's no actual motive other than I met them and they are this minority, and therefore I went, I turned the violence up to 11. And in this case, with the stabbing, it was specifically targeting that. And as someone who has received hate mail, death threats, and whatnot, specifically one that talked about giving me a crude sex change so that I could be raped to death, I saw this specifically as, no, this was a hate crime, and burning the body was to dehumanize even more, not I'm going to then try to cover up the murder. This was maybe a crime of passion, maybe, but the way it was executed was more in lines with a hate crime than just, oh, well, she's trans, so it's a hate crime. No, I mean, literally the way it happened.
And I forget the name of the movie. It was on Life. About 10 years ago, they did a story about a plot that was, or no, it was based on a true story. That a story similar to this that happened to a transgender. I think when she was 15 or 16, she didn't have the full sex change, but she got breasts. And
Okay.
she met a male, and he didn't know. And when his friends are obviously anti-LGBT and based on the plot, but this is the fact of the story that when the friends figured out that something wasn't right about their friend's girlfriend and realized that she was LGBT,
She was trans, yeah.
and it's like, well, they reacted, like so aggressively, and to the point where they ended up kidnapping her, beating her, and then killing her, and then throwing her in a grave.
I think that would have been the Gwen Arujo story.
I think, yeah, that was it. That was it. Yeah.
I was going to say it was either that one, I don't even know the name of the movie, or the movie Boys Don't Cry, which is about a trans guy. So.
And like, well, I say that because, well, we've already seen this, is what I'm saying. When you see it in the news that LGBT are being innocently slaughtered, like, we've seen this before. Hollywood has shown this to you, in I guess a lighter tone to try to let people know that there's a struggle going on out there that people are choosing to ignore for whatever reason, and that in itself is inhumane.
Yeah, and when we realize that this community, my community, is such a small minority, therefore the number of deaths we see is a much greater percentage of us. It does feel like we are being decimated, and it needs to not happen, because when I'm trying to stand up for trans rights, my issue is live and let live. Can we not, kill people? Can you stop killing us? That's not an extreme thing. And that's when it ties back into Colin Kaepernick, who's taking a knee during the national anthem. He's like, my people of color are people. Stop killing us.
And we need to also clear the air, not us, but clear the air roundtable on that too. With Colin Kaepernick and his kneeling for the national anthem and talking about police brutality and racism, no, he's adding that onto that the discrimination of homophobia, the LGBT culture. See, people they run away from the homophobia side of it because they think, oh well, no, he's just talking about racism. But if you notice in the wake of Black Lives Matter, in the wake of like all of the different faction groups that have tried to respond to racism and bigotry in America, in Texas, like they're all saying the same thing. It's not just black men and black women that have experienced racism. It's also black men and black women that have experienced, homophobia and have been subject to, to the police in aggressive manner because of that.
When I was at the trans pride, I was wearing a shirt that said "Black Trans Lives Matter," and
She was. I saw it. I actually need to get one of them shirts.
I think they only have one left, and it's large. I got the small, and it barely fits.
I can wear a large.
All right. But yeah, Black Trans Lives Matter. That is a movement that I agree with and I endorse and support because, yeah, as I can pass for non-trans, as I am white, as I can essentially blend in really well.
You passed the survey.
Yeah. A trans woman of color has it so much worse. And the odds of her surviving to age 30 is really low because of discrimination that's virulent across all lines. Like, they can't get a job. They can't, stay in a place. They might wind up homeless. Where do you think that's going to leave them? So
benefits for jobs and for unions and whatnot like that, and also certain tax breaks. I believe before the Supreme Court was able to overturn everything. But the thing is, there are still states, there are still communities that are fighting back against the progression. And I mean, I want us to end on a positive note because we were talking about a lot of death and racism and kneeling during the national anthem. Yeah, this needs to be heard, and I say that roundtable just to say that these are serious issues and this is reality, that we can't ignore this just because we don't want to hear about it. And I mean, to have someone that's running on a ticket to say that this does matter and that this is a human issue just as much as it is a discrimination issue, it should touch anyone that is in the Dallas area, is in the DFW, is in Texas, that understands what it means to be discriminated against, no matter what the reason.
Yeah, I really don't have anything to add on that.
No problem. Okay, well, just any final thoughts? Just like, do you have anything going on, obviously, with your campaign that'll be happening in the near future?
So every month I'm trying to go out and do something called Discuss with Danny, where we're at a bar and we just like discuss issues. Come meet me. Or there's one called Dine with Danny, where we're just gonna like sit down and have a nice dinner. And you can see all that on my calendar page on my website, DannyForCongress.com. That's DANIFOR Congress.com. There's also a link to get merchandise, get shirts, to donate. And you can even see my position on the issues. I've got a blog up there. I've got a page on my issues. If you think you want to run for office in like 2017, 2018, 2019, on the issues page is linked to a video blog on, how to run for office, what you need to do, how to go about it. Because I want to empower more people to get involved in politics, so we don't have people staying on the sidelines going, oh, they're both like old white men, why do I care? Or, they're not going to talk about me. Well, then you should run for office, and you should make a difference.
Andy, this was a great roundtable. Definitely roundtable. Shout out to you, and shout out to all of Danielle's fans and her followers and her campaign members, her staff, everybody. And of course, we definitely shout out to those who are watching right now. Shout out to the roundtable again, and shout out to DFW. And be looking for Danielle out there in the streets. Like she's actually out there. Like this is real. She's out there. Walking the streets, trying to let people know at the grassroots level things can be different.
Midterms are coming.
Midterms are coming. This is Roundtable.